Silence swallowed the back seat of the black SUV as the blizzard raged outside, snow battering the windows until visibility collapsed to nothing. The frozen highway stretched behind them, empty and white and endless, and somewhere 2 miles back, a broken-down Honda Civic sat abandoned in the darkness with a single hazard light blinking like a dying heartbeat. Aria Morales sat trembling between two men in expensive suits, their faces carved from stone, the scent of cigar smoke and gun oil thick in the air that she could barely breathe. Her thin fingers clutched a backpack to her chest, everything she owned stuffed inside, every belonging she had left in the world compressed into canvas and desperation. The man across from her sat silent, absolutely still, his black overcoat draped over his shoulders like a cape of authority. Salt and pepper hair swept back from a face that had been hardened by decades of choices between mercy and survival. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, white and distinct, a permanent record of violence survived. Blood still stained his white shirt collar, dark and rust-colored against the expensive fabric. Her threadbare coat lay folded beside him. The one she had wrapped around his bleeding body in the snow. "You wrapped your coat around a stranger," he said quietly, his voice deep and solid like an oath, each word chosen with the precision of a man unaccustomed to repetition. His Korean-Italian accent rolled through the syllables. "In a freezing blizzard. When you had nothing." She nodded, unable to speak, her breath fogging in the cold air seeping through the door seals. Her lips had turned blue 2 hours ago. Her hands had stopped shaking somewhere in the last 30 minutes, which she understood meant hypothermia, which meant the cold was winning, but she had done what needed doing and the regret had not found her yet. "What is your name?" he asked. "Aria," she whispered. "Aria Morales." The man across from her did not introduce himself. He simply stared at her with an intensity that made her lungs squeeze, made her ribs feel too tight, made her understand on some cellular level that this was not a rescue. This was something else entirely. Something that would reshape the trajectory of her life in ways she could not yet comprehend. But what Aria did not know, sitting in the warmth of that leather-appointed SUV, was that the man across from her was Giovanni Calabrese. That he controlled every underground poker room in San Francisco, every smuggling route through the port, every debt collection operation from Chinatown to the marina. That men had died for crossing him. That loyalty to him meant everything, and betrayal meant obliteration. That he had not shown mercy in 15 years. Not once. Not to anyone. She had only known that he was dying in the snow. The power of that moment lived in the contrast. The most feared crime boss in the entire city, bleeding and helpless in a snowbank, saved by a homeless woman with exactly $78 in her pocket and a coat so thin it would have failed to protect anyone, let alone a man the size of Giovanni Calabrese. He had been bleeding from a gunshot wound to the shoulder, his black SUV smashed against an overturned semi-truck on the interstate, his security detail scattered and calling for backup, and she had stumbled out of the darkness with nothing but her coat and her humanity still intact. "Why did you do it?" he asked now, leaning forward slightly. The leather seat creaked beneath his weight. "You did not know who I was. You did not know if I was a criminal or a victim or something in between." "Why?" Aria's voice came out barely a whisper, trembling like a candle in the wind. "Because you were dying. And I had nothing else left to give." The two men beside her exchanged a look neither had seen in 15 years, the kind of look that passes between soldiers who have witnessed something shift in the world. "Now, let us go back to the beginning. Let us go back to 24 hours earlier, when Aria Morales was counting crumpled bills by lamplight in a gas station bathroom, trying to make $78 stretch into 3 days, trying to solve an equation that had no solution. The bathroom at the Shell station on Mission Street smelled like bleach and desperation and the stale warmth of industrial hand dryers. A single fluorescent light hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly white glow that made her skin look translucent, papery, like she was already fading from the world. Aria spread the bills across the grimy sink counter, organizing them into piles as if mathematics could save her. $5. $3. A handful of ones. Loose change that added up to 8 cents. $78 total. And she had 3 days to find $35,000 or lose everything. The foreclosure notice sat in her backpack, folded in thirds, the official letterhead of County Bank stamped across the top in black ink. $35,000 by Friday. 3 days. The eviction would follow within hours. The car she lived in would be repossessed. The storage unit where she kept her daughter's things would be locked permanently. She was 27 years old and she was going to disappear. Outside the bathroom, the Shell station hummed with the ordinary rhythms of ordinary people filling their tanks and buying coffee and moving forward with lives that made sense. Aria could hear them, muffled through the metal door, a world she had been ejected from 3 years ago when her ex-husband drained their savings and left her with a newborn, 2 credit card debts, and a eviction notice she could not read because her hands were shaking too badly. She had worked double shifts at the diner on 4th Street for 2 years. 12-hour shifts starting at 5 in the morning, coming home at 6 at night, her feet blistered and her apron stained with coffee and grease she could never fully scrub away. The manager stiffed her on tips twice a week. The other waitresses pitied her in the way that made her feel smaller than invisible. She ate the leftover food from the garbage, the fries nobody wanted, the toast crusts, the broken eggs nobody had claimed. And it still was not enough. The $78 in her possession was the result of 2 weeks of saving. Every dollar the diner paid her that did not go to her storage unit rental or her car insurance or the medication her daughter needed, she had saved. She had not bought anything. She had not spent a single penny on herself since she had become homeless. Not a coffee. Not a candy bar. Not a moment of dignity in the form of a warm bath. She had learned to shower at the truck stop off the highway, where the attendants did not ask questions. She had learned to sleep in her Honda Civic, in parking lots of closed stores where the security cameras did not work. She had learned to be invisible so completely that people looked through her, not at her, as if she had already become a ghost. The sound of footsteps outside the bathroom made her freeze. She quickly gathered the bills and shoved them back into her wallet, her movement sharp with the anxiety of being caught in this moment of desperation, this quiet accounting of her failure. A man's voice drifted through the metal door. "I'm telling you, Douglas is going to move on her soon. She's perfect. Single mother, no support system, nobody looking for her." The other voice, lower, harder, "What about her debt? Easier that way. Desperate women are compliant. She owes money, nobody's going to believe her when she disappears." Aria's breath stopped. Her hand froze on the bathroom door handle. The voices continued, moving away toward the front of the station, but the words remained suspended in her chest like a blade wrapped in ice. She understood those words. She understood them in the way a gazelle understands the presence of a predator, in the way her body went absolutely rigid and her survival instinct screamed at her to run. She waited inside the bathroom for 4 minutes, counting each second against the pounding of her heart. Then she gathered her backpack, which contained everything she owned in the world, a change of clothes, her daughter's first pair of baby shoes she had kept from the shelter, a phone with no minutes, and the $78 that would not save her. She slipped out of the bathroom, kept her head down, and walked toward the parking lot where her Honda Civic waited with a quarter tank of gas and absolutely nowhere to go. The November wind caught her as she stepped outside, tore through her thin coat like a blade cutting through air. The thermometer on the station sign read 31 degrees. Winter was arriving. The cold would deepen. The nights would become lethal. She had 3 days to solve an impossible problem while 2 voices in a gas station bathroom had just made it clear that the people who wanted to help her were actually hunting her. Waiting for her to break. Waiting for her to become so desperate that she would accept whatever they were offering, not understanding until far too late that she had walked directly into the jaws of something that would devour her completely. She drove. The highway stretched out before her, disappearing into darkness and snow that was just beginning to fall, just beginning to accumulate on the asphalt. The wipers scraped back and forth, the only rhythm in a car that smelled like unwashed hair and fear and the faint scent of formula from 3 years ago that she could never quite clean away. The fuel gauge dropped from a quarter tank to an eighth. The snow fell heavier. And somewhere on the interstate, a black SUV with tinted windows was preparing to collide with an overturned semi-truck in a way that would change everything. The fluorescent lights hummed above Aria Morales like something dying slowly, a high-pitched whine that had become the soundtrack of her survival. She knelt on the cracked tile floor of the Chevron bathroom, the kind of floor that had absorbed 3 decades of human desperation, and smoothed each bill across her thighs with trembling fingers. A 20. 3 5s. 2 10s. 17 1s. The resting quarters and dimes that clinked like tiny accusations when she gathered them into her palm. $78. She whispered the number aloud. 78. Then again, as if repetition might transform it into something that could actually save her. $78. The third time, her voice broke completely. $78 stood between her and homelessness. Between her and Douglas Hale's business card, which sat folded in her coat pocket like a snake waiting to strike. Between her and 3 more nights in the Honda Civic before the cold deepened enough to stop her heart while she slept. Her hands shook as she gathered the money and returned it to her backpack. 2 changes of clothes, folded as small as prayer. A Ziploc bag containing a toothbrush, a bar of soap worn down to a sliver, a bottle of conditioner she had stolen from a hotel where she'd worked for 2 weeks before the manager found out she was living in her car and fired her on the spot. A water bottle. And wrapped in a blanket the color of dandelions, tiny white shoes, infant-sized, with laces that had never been tied by anyone but her. Emma's first shoes. Her daughter would be 7 years old now. Emma lived with Aria's mother in Portland, safe and fed and surrounded by people who loved her. Aria had made that choice 8 months ago, after Thomas died, after the medical bills and funeral expenses and the eviction notice had made it clear that she could not provide for both of them. Some mornings, Aria forgot what Emma's voice sounded like. Other mornings, she woke gasping from dreams where she was screaming her daughter's name into an empty room. She held the shoes against her chest and breathed. The bathroom tiles were cold. Everything was cold now. November had arrived early, and the weather reports kept mentioning something unprecedented, a blizzard sweeping down from the mountains, freezing temperatures, ice forming on roads that had never seen ice before. Winter coming like a blade. A knock on the bathroom door made her flinch. 3 sharp raps, impatient. Occupied, she called, her voice barely a whisper. She stuffed the shoes back into the backpack, zipped it with careful precision, and straightened her clothes. The reflection in the mirror showed a woman she didn't recognize. 32 years old but looking decades older. Dark hair pulled into a braid so tight it pulled at her temples. Eyes the color of storm clouds, hollow from months of rationing food and sleeping in her car. Cheekbones sharp as knives. Lips pale. She looked like nobody. Which meant she would be easy to ignore. Easy to discard. Easy to disappear. The woman at the gas station counter didn't even glance at Aria as she purchased a bottle of water for $2. Her balance now, $76. She had exactly 3 days to find the $35,000 that Douglas Hale claimed she owed for assistance that had never been offered, or the men who'd approached her outside the homeless shelter that afternoon would come collecting. They'd shown her photographs. Her address, not her real address, but close enough. Emma's school in Portland, though they'd blurred the building's name, leaving the threat perfectly clear. The parking lot stretched out under sodium lights, each one creating a small island of yellow in the gathering darkness. Her 2004 Honda Civic sat in the far corner, passenger window held up with duct tape, rust spreading across the hood like a disease. She'd bought it for $800 2 years ago with money she'd saved from waitressing. It had 17,000 miles more on it now and approximately 6 months left before the engine seized completely. A man leaned against a black sedan 2 pumps away, watching her with the patience of someone who had learned to wait for prey to exhaust itself. Douglas Hale. Mid-40s, expensive leather jacket the color of old blood, teeth too white to be real. He smiled as she turned the key in her car door, a predator's smile, all surface charm and nothing underneath. Car trouble. His voice was oil poured over gravel. Aria didn't answer. She opened the driver's side door and began settling into the seat, but he moved with surprising speed for his size, his hand appearing on the window frame before she could close it. I only ask because I run a staffing agency, he continued, leaning down so his face filled the window space. West Coast Hospitality Solutions. We place women in transition into service industry positions. Hotels, events, private functions. Housing is included. You receive a paycheck within 7 days of your first shift. Clean work. Safe environment. His breath smelled like cigarettes and energy drinks. I'm not interested, Aria said. You're living in your car, he replied, not as a question. Just a fact. A statement of her complete and utter failure. I can see it. The way you move. The way you're wearing 3 layers of clothing in November. The way you counted your money in the bathroom like you were praying to it. He extended a business card between 2 fingers. Cream-colored, embossed letters, the kind of card that cost money to have printed. Think about it. When you're ready to stop choosing the hard way, call the number. Anytime. Day or night. We take care of our girls. He walked away before she could refuse, disappearing into the fluorescent brightness of the convenience store. The business card lay in her lap like contamination. She didn't know that Douglas Hale had been hunting women like her for 18 months. That he developed an instinct for spotting them, the ones too exhausted to fight, too isolated to have anyone who would notice if they vanished, too desperate to ask questions about what the actual work entailed. That there were 17 women already in his network, scattered across California and Nevada and Oregon, living in conditions that made homelessness look like luxury. That he'd been watching her specifically for 6 weeks, learning her routines, her vulnerability markers, the exact moment when her resistance would finally collapse. Aria crumpled the business card and threw it into the trash bin outside the gas station. Then she drove. The highway opened before her like a throat, Interstate 101 heading north, the road she'd been planning to take toward the diner in Mill Valley where the manager didn't ask questions and let people sleep in their cars if they bought coffee. The thermometer on the station sign as she pulled away read 31 degrees. Cold for November. Dangerous cold. Within 5 miles, the snow began. Not the gentle snow of Christmas postcards. This was violence. This was the sky fracturing into white shards that assaulted the windshield and dissolved into slush. The wiper scraped back and forth, a rhythm that sounded like breathing, like something alive and struggling. Her headlights illuminated maybe 30 feet ahead before the white swallowed everything else. No other cars visible. No guardrails. Just the sense of a road existing beneath her, though she couldn't actually see it anymore. The engine coughed. Then coughed again. The temperature gauge spiked into the red zone, that small needle climbing toward the number that meant catastrophe. Steam rose from under the hood, visible for a moment before the snow consumed it. The engine made a sound like something dying, a high, mechanical shriek, then silence. Complete silence. The kind of silence that meant the engine had seized, meant the car was no longer a car but just a metal box sitting on an invisible road in a storm that had come from nowhere. She coasted to the shoulder, hazard lights blinking uselessly into the whiteout. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned the color of bone. 8% battery on her phone. No service. The heat shut off automatically when the engine died. She had a coat, thin, second-hand, donated from a thrift store, but the warmest thing she owned. She had the $76 left in her backpack. She had Emma's shoes. She did not have rescue. She wrapped the coat tighter around herself and waited for the cold to decide whether it would kill her quickly or slowly. The snow accumulated on the windshield, erasing the world outside, creating a cocoon of white and darkness. Her breath fogged the glass. The wind howled outside like something with teeth. Aria closed her eyes. 3 miles ahead, on a curve of the same highway, the night was tearing itself open. 2 black SUVs had been ambushed by men who should have been family. Giovanni Calabrese, 6'2" tall, shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of an entire criminal empire, sat in the rear vehicle with a gunshot wound burning through his shoulder like a brand. Around him, his men, Rocco and Dario and 5 others whose names he had stopped learning years ago, were returning fire with the precision of people who had trained for this moment since adolescence. The bullets came from vehicles driven by men loyal to his brother Antonio, men who had chosen the promise of Sinaloa cartel money and power over blood and oath and the 30-year code that had built this empire in the first place. Giovanni had made his choice. One shot, clean, right through Antonio's chest, his own brother collapsing like a puppet with its strings cut. No hesitation. No mercy. Just the cold mathematics of survival. And then the bullet found him, punched through his shoulder, and everything became noise and blood and the understanding that he was not invincible. The convoy sped forward through the snow. The clock on the underground poker room wall showed 3:36 in the morning. Giovanni Calabrese sat motionless in the leather chair, his left shoulder wrapped beneath the black dress shirt, sultan pepper hair perfectly groomed, scar through his left eyebrow catching the amber light from the pendant lamps overhead. Around him, the green felt tables lay empty. The other players had been dismissed an hour ago. Only Rocco and Dario remained, standing near the mahogany bar, speaking in low voices that barely disturbed the silence. Aria Morales sat across from him, still wearing the borrowed clothes they'd provided, soft grey sweats that cost more than she'd earned in a month at the diner, her feet in new socks, her backpack resting against the leg of her chair like a lifeline. The fall line had been removed from her arm that morning. The medic had stitched the small wound where she'd ripped it out in panic. "Tell me about Emma," Giovanni said. Not a question. A quiet command. Aria's hands trembled. She clasped them together. "How did you?" "Your backpack. Inside the front pocket. Baby shoes. Size 2. The leather's worn from constant handling. You carried them through the snow, through the cold, through everything. A mother doesn't do that for an accident. She does it for a memory." He paused. "For a loss?" The room seemed to contract around her. The ticking of the wall clock grew louder, each second a hammer strike against her chest. "She would have been 7 next month," Aria whispered. She had Emma's eyes. Brown, almost black, and when she laughed, the words dissolved. Her throat closed. Giovanni rose from his chair with deliberate slowness. He moved to the bar where Rocco had discreetly positioned a box of tissues and a glass of water. He poured the water himself, the gesture absurd, the most powerful man in San Francisco's underworld carrying a crystal glass like a nurse in a hospital. He set it beside her, then returned to his seat. "How did she die?" he asked. "Pneumonia turned into something else. The doctors called it acute autoimmune disorder. They said experimental treatment might help, but it cost $35,000. I had $78. I had Emma's shoes and a broken car and $35,000 in debt I couldn't pay." She looked up at him. "I had 3 days to find the money or she went on a waiting list. She didn't make it that long." Around them, the poker room seemed suspended in amber, the cigar smoke hung motionless in the air, the leather chairs casting deep shadows, the stacks of cash on the tables unreachable, obscene in their abundance. "The funeral?" Giovanni asked. "County cremation. Free. They gave me her ashes in a cardboard box." Aria's voice had become mechanical, the words of someone who had repeated this story so many times that her voice no longer belonged to her. "I scattered them in Golden Gate Park. Near the bridge. I thought she'd like to see the ocean." Rocco had turned away, his broad shoulders tense. Dario was studying the floor with sudden intensity. Giovanni's jaw tightened. The only visible reaction was the slight deepening of the scar tissue, the way his eyes held hers without blinking. In 15 years of working for him, Rocco had seen Giovanni Calabrese handle everything, betrayal, violence, the dissolution of empires, with calculated precision. He had never seen him like this. "Your husband?" Giovanni asked. "Marco. Construction worker. Fell from scaffolding 3 years ago. Broke his back. The surgery was $47,000. Then infection, another surgery, another 20,000. He recovered enough to do light-duty work, but the debt. She shook her head. He tried so hard. He wanted Emma to have a better life. But the medical bills just kept coming. He started drinking. Not a lot, just enough to make the pain go away at night. One morning I found him in the bathroom. Overdose. The police said it was accidental. The silence that followed was absolute. The clock ticked. Somewhere in the building above, a door closed with distant finality. How long ago? Giovanni's voice had become something else, not a question but a statement of fact delivered in tones that suggested he already knew the answer and was testing whether she would tell the truth. 11 months. And after he died, everything collapsed. The apartment, the job I'd managed to keep, the daycare for Emma. I moved into a shelter with her, found work at the diner doing doubles, but the debt collectors kept calling. They'd found me. They wanted payment or they'd press charges, garnish whatever I could earn. So I left. Took Emma and lived in my car, moving to different neighborhoods so the social workers wouldn't find us and take her away. Aria's hands had begun to shake again. I was trying to keep her. I was trying to survive. And then she got sick and I couldn't afford to save her. Giovanni stood. He walked to the poker table and picked up one of the stacks of cash, $50,000 in neat hundreds, sitting where it had been abandoned by a Silicon Valley venture capitalist who'd lost it in a single hand. He held it for a moment, then set it back down. This stack, he said, could have saved her. Aria flinched as if struck. This stack, he continued, moving to another table, and this one, and this one. There are 12 tables in this room. At any given time, there is between $2 and $4 million in play. Last night alone, we moved $700,000 across these tables. $700,000 so that men who are already wealthy could gamble for the pleasure of watching their money multiply. And a child died because $35,000 existed somewhere in the world but not in her mother's hands. He turned back to face her, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something barely audible, something that made the guards instinctively move their hands away from their weapons. That ends now, Giovanni said. Everything ends now. You were a nobody to them. To the men who took your money. To the system that refused to help. To a world that decided your daughter's life wasn't worth $35,000. But you are not a nobody to me. You are the woman who wrapped her only coat around a dying stranger in a blizzard. You are the woman who carried her dead daughter's shoes through the darkness. You are the woman who somehow, impossibly, remained human in a world designed to strip humanity away. He moved toward her, and Aria's breath caught. His presence was enormous, not in size alone but in the way the room seemed to contract around him, the way light itself seemed to acknowledge his authority. I want you to work for me, Giovanni said. Not in any capacity that involves the operations you see here. I have people for that. I want you to work as my personal assistant. You'll be paid $100,000 a year, starting immediately. Housing will be provided. Healthcare for any future needs. Education fund established in your name. In exchange, you give me loyalty. You remain honest with me always. And you let me show you that the night you saved my life was the night you saved yours. Aria stared at him. The numbers seemed impossible, unreal, like a hallucination brought on by months of deprivation. Why would you do this? Because the people who let your daughter die believed you were nobody. And because I believe in balancing debts. You gave me your coat. Now I'm giving you everything. The door to the poker room burst open. Dario's hand moved toward his weapon, then stopped as Rocco appeared, breathless, his face dark with urgent news. Boss, Rocco said. We have a problem. Douglas Hale just called 3 minutes ago. He knows she's here. He's claiming she's part of his operation, that she belongs to him. Giovanni's expression didn't change, but Aria saw something shift in his eyes, a predator recognizing competition. Tell me everything, Giovanni said quietly. And 3 blocks away, in a high-rise overlooking the city, Victoria Ashford sat at her dining room table with her phone pressed to her ear, speaking in rapid, poisonous whispers to the trafficker on the other end of the line. She described the homeless woman who had humiliated her. She provided details. Names. The location of the underground poker room. The name of the man who now protected her. The wheels had already begun to turn. The machinery of destruction was already in motion. But neither Aria nor Giovanni knew yet what was coming toward them from the darkness, gathering speed, ready to test the promise Giovanni had just made. What neither of them understood was that Victoria Ashford didn't make threats. She made investments. And the investment she'd just made in Aria's destruction would cost more than anyone could imagine. 3 days later, the waterfront district breathed rain and diesel exhaust. 6 o'clock in the evening, fog rolling in from the bay like a living thing, swallowing the streetlights one by one. Aria Morales stood in the lobby of a glass building on the Embarcadero, documents clutched against her chest, contracts for legitimate real estate holdings, nothing glamorous, just the ordinary business of a man who owned legitimate things alongside the darkness. She had insisted on coming alone. Giovanni had objected, but she held firm. She would not be a ghost, invisible and protected, forever looking over her shoulder. She would move through the world like a person who belonged in it. The elevator descended. Her reflection caught in the polished steel doors, a woman transformed in 3 days. Giovanni's clothes hung on her still, designer fabric worth more than her entire year of survival, but there was something different in her posture now. The homeless invisibility had cracked. She stepped into the November evening. The black sedan appeared before she reached her car. For blocks away, Victoria Ashford sat in her Mercedes, fingers curled around her phone, watching through tinted windows as the trap she had spent 72 hours building began to spring. She had given Douglas Hale everything: the location of the underground poker room, the name of the woman, the name of the man who protected her. She had even provided her private security footage showing Aria entering Giovanni's building, proof of proximity, proof of connection, leverage wrapped in digital files and malice. Douglas Hale climbed from the sedan slowly, deliberately, like a man who had learned to enjoy the moment before violence. He was 47 years old but carried himself like someone older, harder. His suit was charcoal grey, expensive but worn in a way that suggested it had been through dark places. A gold ring caught light on his right hand, a signet ring, family crest, old money, the kind that believed some lives were disposable. Behind him came 2 men who had been broken into shapes that fit his purposes. "Miss Morales," he said, voice smooth as oil on water. "Time to honor our agreement." Aria stepped backward. "I never agreed to anything. I made that very clear. You took my card. In my world, that's a contract." His smile revealed teeth too white, too perfect. "And Mr. Calabrese's protection doesn't extend everywhere. Not to parking lots. Not to moments when you're alone and thinking you're safe." His hand rose slightly. His men moved. Hands grabbed Aria's arms, strong, practiced, the grip of men who had done this countless times before. She screamed, the sound sharp and cutting, and she fought with the desperation of someone who remembered every nightmare, every dark basement, every moment she thought her life was ending. Her documents scattered across the wet pavement like white birds taking flight. But before Hale's men could drag her toward the sedan, a voice cut through the rain like a blade. "Hands off!" Rocco emerged from the mist with 4 men in tactical gear, weapons drawn with the efficiency of people who understood violence as a language. The Embarcadero froze. Rain continued its percussion against the buildings, against the cars, against the concrete where Aria struggled in her captor's grip. Hale's smile never wavered. He raised his hands, nodding to his men, who released her immediately. Aria stumbled forward, gasping, her coat torn at the shoulder. "Just a misunderstanding," Hale said pleasantly. "We were leaving anyway." He backed toward the sedan with his men, each movement casual, unthreatening, but his eyes held something darker, the look of someone whose pride had been wounded but whose hunger remained intact. He climbed into the passenger seat. The sedan accelerated, taillights disappearing into the fog within seconds. Rocco approached Aria, his hand extended. "The boss is expecting you. Come." Aria took his hand, but she was trembling, not from cold, though the November wind had teeth. From knowing. From understanding that this was not finished. 11 hours later, Aria sat on the bathroom floor of her protected apartment, knees pulled tight against her chest, shaking in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. The cold tile pressed against her spine like an accusation. Her hands would not stop trembling. She could still feel the grip of Hale's men, the certainty of what was about to happen, the absolute knowledge that if Rocco had arrived 30 seconds later, she would have vanished into the machinery of his operation. The bathroom light flickered overhead, buzzing like insects trapped in glass. Rain hammered the window with medieval fury. She pulled Emma's first shoes from her backpack, tiny white leather booties, size 3, worn soft from being held in desperate hands for 5 years. She pressed them against her chest and the tears came, silent, shaking sobs that felt like they were tearing her apart from the inside. This was what freedom looked like. Not safety. Terror disguised as protection. Living in an apartment purchased with money from a crime empire, guarded by men who carried weapons, hunted by a trafficker who believed she owed him debt in flesh and broken futures. She had escaped the snow only to walk into a nightmare with better furniture. The darkness whispered its familiar arguments. Emma was gone, her mother was gone, there was nothing left worth saving. It would be better if she disappeared. Better for Giovanni, better for Rocco, better for everyone whose lives she had contaminated with her presence. Her fingers tightened around the baby shoes. And then she saw Emma's face the way it had looked in the shelter playground, 5 years old, laughing, telling Aria something with absolute certainty: superheroes never give up because someone always needs saving. One tiny memory. One fragment of light. Aria's breathing steadied. She set the shoes down carefully, washed her face with water so cold it burned, and made a decision that would change everything. She would not run. She would not break. If Giovanni Calabrese could survive executing his own brother and still choose mercy, she could survive this. The poker room was underground, accessible through a basement entrance that only 36 people in San Francisco even knew existed. Aria descended stone steps worn smooth by 40 years of footfalls. The air smelled like cigar smoke and old money and the particular atmosphere of places where empires were built across cards and conversation. Giovanni waited behind a mahogany desk, Rocco and Dario standing at perimeter points. On the desktop, surveillance photographs spanning the last 72 hours. Douglas Hale leaving restaurants. Victoria Ashford entering a boutique hotel downtown. A map with red marks indicating 15 properties connected to Hale's trafficking network, safe houses, processing centers, auction venues for women whose disappearances made no headlines. "They are working together," Giovanni said without preamble. His voice was low, controlled, the voice of a man who had learned that anger was a luxury. Victoria provided him with information. Location of this place, your name, your routine. She wants you destroyed because you embarrassed her at her husband's club. Hale wants you because your connection to me makes you valuable. You become leverage. Aria looked at the photographs, at the evidence of systematic conspiracy, at the proof that there were 2 machines grinding toward her destruction. "Then use me as bait," she said. "Draw them out." Giovanni's eyes flashed, not anger, something more complex. Respect, perhaps. Dangerous respect. No. Yes. I'm not helpless. I won't run. But I also won't let them keep coming. End this. The room went absolutely silent. Even the background hum of the poker room above seemed to pause. Rocco exchanged a glance with Dario. In 15 years of working for Giovanni, they had never seen him negotiate with a civilian. They had never seen him challenged by anyone carrying less authority than he did. Giovanni studied her for 10 full seconds. "If we do this, we do it completely my way. You follow every instruction without deviation." Agreed. 11 p.m., 24 hours later. A warehouse in the industrial district, the kind of structure that had lost its original purpose years ago and been repurposed into shadow. Aria walked toward it alone, the wire taped against her ribs, knowing that Giovanni's men surrounded the location in concentric circles, snipers on roofs, teams in abandoned vehicles, Rocco coordinating everything through encrypted communications. Inside, Douglas Hale waited with 6 men and a van outfitted with restraints, false identification documents, and the apparatus of disappearance. His men wore expressions of hungry anticipation. "Smart choice," Hale said, smiling that perfect teeth smile. "Very smart. Coming alone. Accepting reality. I didn't come alone." 12 men in black tactical gear materialized from the warehouse shadows like ghosts taking physical form. Rocco led them, weapon raised, voice official and cold, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Nobody moves. Everybody on the ground now. They were not federal agents. But they wore the tactical gear perfectly, and panic doesn't distinguish between costume and credential. Hale's men reached for weapons. Giovanni's team was faster, disarming them with the clinical precision of people trained in violence the way musicians are trained in music. One man had his wrist broken. Another was thrown against a concrete wall hard enough to crack ribs. Within 90 seconds, 6 traffickers lay prone on concrete, bleeding, immobilized. Hale backed away until his spine touched the warehouse wall. He was trembling, not with cold, with the recognition that the predator had become the prey. Giovanni emerged from the darkness. He was wearing a black cashmere coat that probably cost more than Hale's entire operation's monthly profit margin. He approached slowly, each step measured, deliberate, the walk of a general surveying a battlefield he had already won. "You take mothers," Giovanni said, his voice like venom, like poison meant for a specific victim. "You take daughters. You take someone's child, and you break them for profit. You take women who have nothing left and you teach them that nothing is all they deserve. Not in my city. Never in my city." He nodded to Rocco. Real federal agents entered then, the genuine article, with genuine badges and genuine authority. Giovanni had coordinated with them 24 hours earlier, providing everything they needed to dismantle Hale's entire network. Locations of 14 safe houses across California and Nevada. Names of 37 victims. Bank records spanning 3 states. Testimony from 4 women who had agreed to cooperate in exchange for witness protection that Giovanni had personally guaranteed and funded with his own money. Handcuffs snapped on Hale's wrists like the sound of a coffin being sealed. "Douglas Hale," the lead federal agent announced, "you are under arrest for human trafficking across state lines, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. You're looking at a minimum of 40 years in federal custody." Hale collapsed to his knees, grabbing at Giovanni's coat, his perfect composure shattered like dropped glass. "Please. Please, I can pay. Whatever you want. Name the price." Giovanni looked down with an expression that held no mercy, no negotiation, no possibility of redemption. "Death would be too quick. Too easy. Too merciful for what you've done. You're going to live in a cage for 40 years, surrounded by men who know exactly what you are. Men with daughters. With sisters. With mothers." He paused. "And they have very long memories." Hale was dragged away screaming, his legs not cooperating, his mind not accepting that the machinery of his own destruction had already engaged and could not be reversed. The federal agents moved with precision, coordinated raids across 3 states were happening simultaneously. By dawn, every location on Giovanni's list had been hit. Every accomplice was being arrested. The systematic dismantling of Douglas Hale's trafficking network was complete. 3 blocks away, Victoria Ashford watched police lights bloom across the night sky. She understood, in that moment, that she had made a catastrophic error in judgment. She started her Mercedes. Dario stepped in front of the vehicle, weapon visible, immovable as stone. She slammed on the brakes, rolled down her window with shaking hands. "I didn't do anything. I was just watching." "That's not a crime. You coordinated with a human trafficker to have an innocent woman kidnapped and sold into exploitation," Dario said quietly. We have your phone records, your emails, your text messages documenting every conversation, every conspiracy. Victoria's face went the color of old paper. That's impossible. I'm Victoria Ashford. My family, my husband. Your husband is being arrested right now for money laundering connected to organized crime. Your assets are being frozen. Your social standing is being dismantled as we speak. More federal agents approached her Mercedes. Victoria was pulled from the driver's seat, handcuffed in her Chanel suit, her carefully constructed appearance collapsing into panic and tears. Giovanni had tipped the media as well. Photographers flashed from every angle as she was placed into a federal vehicle. Her mugshot would be on the society pages by morning, no longer the celebrated philanthropist but the woman who had conspired with traffickers. Conspiracy to commit human trafficking. Conspiracy to kidnap. Federal prison, minimum 15 years. Money laundering conspiracy connected to her husband's criminal organization. Another 20 years stacked on top. Social annihilation complete. Both villains were driven away into their systematic destruction as the rain continued falling on the San Francisco night. Giovanni stood with Aria in the warehouse doorway, water streaming down the concrete, the city lights reflected in every puddle like fallen stars. It's over, he said quietly. They can't touch you now. Aria looked at the man who had mobilized an empire to protect a homeless woman who had given him her coat when he was dying. Who had fed her, clothed her, paid her debt, and now had dismantled the machinery designed to destroy her. Why? She asked. Why did you do all of this? Giovanni turned to face her fully, and the scarred side of his face caught the warehouse light, a man marked by violence and consequence, carved by the weight of choices that could never be unmade. Because you showed me mercy, he said, when I was bleeding out in the snow. Because you gave everything when you had nothing. Because in a world that took everything from both of us, you reminded me that some things are still worth saving. Their eyes held, two people bound by shared darkness, by the memory of one coat in a blizzard, by the knowledge that sometimes survival itself is an act of defiance. The morning light spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Giovanni Calabrese's penthouse office, casting long shadows across imported marble floors. Aria Morales sat at a desk organizing real estate contracts, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the keyboard. She wore clothes Giovanni had bought her, simple, quality, the kind of fabric that didn't scratch against skin. Her backpack, once her only possession, now sat in a corner like a relic from another lifetime. She had an apartment now. A salary. A job title that still didn't feel quite real when she said it aloud. Giovanni entered carrying 2 coffee cups, the steam rising in thin threads. He set one on her desk, the gesture so routine now it had become intimate, the small kindness of knowing how she liked it. Dark roast, no sugar, cream only. Douglas Hale was sentenced this morning, he said quietly. 45 years. No parole eligibility. Aria's fingers stilled above the keyboard. She closed her eyes and felt something release in her chest, like a knot that had been wound too tight finally loosening. That weight she carried, the fear that lived in her bones, it didn't vanish completely, but it shifted. Became smaller. More manageable. And Victoria? Aria asked. 22 years for conspiracy to traffic. Her husband's testimony added another 8 years for money laundering connected to the operation. Giovanni paused, watching her face. He turned state's evidence to save himself. She'll be 70 before she sees daylight again. Her name is already being scrubbed from every charity board in the city. The philanthropist Victoria Ashford has been erased. They stood together at the window, watching San Francisco wake. The bay stretched grey-green beyond the Golden Gate Bridge, ferries moving like toys across the water. From this height, the city looked peaceful. The violence, the trafficking rings, the systematic destruction of 2 people who had conspired to exploit her, it all happened in the invisible spaces beneath the pretty skyline. I've been thinking, Aria said carefully, her voice still carrying the hesitation of someone not yet accustomed to being heard. About what? About the other women. the ones Douglas had already taken. You said 14 safe houses, 37 victims still needing placement. Giovanni nodded. The FBI was coordinating with social services, placing survivors in facilities across Northern California. Medical care, legal support, the slow bureaucratic machinery of healing. I want to help them, Aria continued, turning from the window to face him directly. I want to run a program, housing, job training, real support. I know what it's like to have nothing. I know the specific terror of thinking you'll never have anything again. Let me do this. Giovanni studied her for a long moment. The homeless woman who had given her coat to a dying stranger had become someone with purpose, vision, a clarity about what needed to happen. She was no longer invisible. You'll have whatever resources you need, he said. Full funding. Complete protection. We'll call it Emma's house. Aria's breath caught at her daughter's name, the daughter she had finally gotten custody of, who was sleeping in a real bed for the first time in 2 years, who was learning that safety was something that could last. Thank you, Aria whispered. Thank you, Aria, Giovanni replied, moving toward his desk. He pulled open a drawer, removed something carefully folded. The threadbare coat. Her coat. The one she had wrapped around his bleeding body that night in the blizzard. It had been cleaned, mended at the seams, preserved like something sacred. I don't understand, Aria said. You gave me this when I was dying. I'm giving it back now that we've both survived. He held it out to her. She took it, held it against her chest, feeling the weight of everything it represented. The night that changed everything. The moment she chose mercy over survival. The coat that had become a bridge between two worlds that should have never touched. 3 nights later, the rooftop garden behind Emma's house was quiet except for the distant sound of the city. Aria and Giovanni sat at a small table, wine glasses catching the light of the city below. He was teaching her to appreciate quality, not expensive for expense's sake, but the difference between something made carefully and something made quickly. He poured slowly, deliberately, and watched her face as she tasted. Tell me something true, she said quietly. Something you've never told anyone. Giovanni set down his glass. The scarred side of his face caught the lamplight, that permanent reminder of violence and consequence, carved by the weight of choices that could never be unmade. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. When I woke in the snow and saw you wrapping your coat around me, I thought I was dying and an angel had come. Then I realized you were real and human and shaking so badly you could barely stand. And I thought, if someone this good exists in a world this dark, maybe I haven't lost everything. Maybe there's still something worth saving. Aria reached across the table, took his hand. The gesture was natural now, earned through weeks of trust built moment by moment. You saved me on the worst night of my life, she said. I saved you on yours. We're even. No. Giovanni's eyes held hers with an intensity that made her heart race. We're just beginning. The romantic tension between them crackled like live electricity, two people bound by trauma and mercy, finding in each other something worth rebuilding for. But Giovanni didn't push, didn't demand anything. He waited, patient as stone, understanding in his core that rushing would break the fragile trust they had constructed from nothing. 6 months later, Aria stood in the main hall of Emma's house, watching 20 women attend a job skills workshop. Children played in a supervised room visible through glass walls, safe, protected, learning that adults could be trusted. Her title was director. Her salary was generous enough that she could save money, an experience entirely foreign to her. Her purpose was crystalline and certain. Giovanni appeared at her side, as he did every week, checking on progress, offering support, moving through the shelter with a deference that shocked everyone who knew his reputation. They walked together, and every woman they passed nodded with something like respect. They knew Aria's story, knew she had been exactly where they were, knew she had survived and thrived. 32 women placed in permanent jobs this month, Aria reported. 14 in stable housing. 6 enrolled in college programs. 0 returns to trafficking situations. Giovanni's pride was visible in the careful way he held his shoulders, the slight nod of his head. "You built this." "We built this," Aria corrected. The word we carried enormous weight. They were partners now in every sense, though neither had formally spoken it aloud. That evening, they sat in the Japanese garden behind the shelter, the sky burning orange and pink as the sun descended. Carefully tended plants surrounded them, bamboo creating natural walls against the city noise beyond. "I need to tell you something," Giovanni said, his voice carefully controlled. "I'm listening." "I'm in love with you, Aria. I have been since the night you gave me your coat. I've waited 6 months to tell you because I needed you to see that I can be patient, that I can respect your boundaries, that I won't take advantage of what you've survived. But keeping it inside is killing me, and silence serves no one anymore." Aria turned to him fully, tears blurring her vision. "I know. I've known for months. And I love you too, you terrifying, complicated man who runs an empire but kneels down to help me pick up papers I've dropped. You saved my life by letting me save yours." They kissed, soft, careful, perfect. The moment earned through months of trust and patience. When they pulled apart, Giovanni whispered against her hair, "I'm still a dangerous man, Aria. My world is dark." "I know," she said. "Because I've seen the darkest parts of you and you've seen mine, and we're still here. That's stronger than anything." 1 year after that blizzard night, Giovanni and Aria stood together in his underground poker room before the green felt tables. Rocco and Dario stood flanking them, watching with something like paternal pride. They had witnessed the transformation of their boss from a man hardened by violence to a man who funded women's shelters and kissed his partner with genuine tenderness. A year ago, Giovanni told his assembled organization, his voice carrying through the room like thunder, "I was bleeding in the snow, certain I would die. A homeless woman with nothing gave me her coat and saved my life. She taught me that mercy is strength. That humanity survives even in the darkest places." He turned to Aria, took her hand. "After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places." Aria looked around the room, the armed guards, the stacks of money, the cigar smoke, and understood it clearly. This was Giovanni's world, violent and complicated, but he was using it now to protect women like her, to dismantle trafficking networks across the entire West Coast. Imperfect justice, but justice nonetheless. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that mercy can survive even in darkness, drop a like right now and share it with someone who needs to know that change is possible. Subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's story of survival and redemption. Leave a comment telling us, have you ever given everything when you had almost nothing? We read every single one. Thank you for staying until the very end. We wish you good health, joy, and days filled with peace. After the rain, the sky clears. We'll see you in the next video.